Good. Okay, perfect. I am so excited to have James Nestor live with us this morning. He's a journalist and the author of the book called Breathe, The New Science of a Lost Art. And this is something that I'm super passionate about talking to clients about and my own personal journey of learning to breathe again. So, James, thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me.
James, can I ask you what inspired you to write your book, Breathe?
Well, it was a number of things. It was from a few experiences that I had breathing in various classes that no doctor could explain, that my father-in-law couldn't explain, who is a pulmonologist, that my brother-in-law couldn't explain, who's an ER doc. Got me curious about it, but as a science journalist, I really wanted to understand what was actually happening, not just to my body, but to all of our bodies when we breathe in these different ways, where breathing could take us. And so, through various years, talking to various people, I just sort of chipped away at the subject. So, this book took a very long time to piece together.
And did it start from a personal experience? Like, did you have a bad breathing journey? Were you not breathing how you wanted to be? Or was it more that you were just fascinated by something that we obviously do daily and how we could improve it or what the health benefits of it were?
I wasn't aware that I was breathing well or breathing poorly because I had always understood that breathing was just a binary thing. You either did it or you didn't do it. And so, through most of my life, for decades, I was exercising all the time. I was eating well. I was sleeping well. But I was having chronic respiratory problems, which I was told were completely normal to have bronchitis and to have mild pneumonia every other year in, year out. They just said, oh, that's fine. You're getting older. Here's your antibiotics. But that seemed a little weird to me, especially when I started exploring the subject more and found that that isn't normal at all. And so many of us are suffering from so many problems that are associated with inadequate or improper breathing.
Totally. And what, from your research and writing the book, what are some of the symptoms or some of the problems that you've seen to be associated with incorrect breathing?
Well, name it. I mean, metabolic problems, neurological problems, skin problems, autoimmune problems, asthma, sleep apnea. You could just go down the list. So many of the chronic diseases that we're suffering from and the problems that we're suffering from are tied to inflammation. These are diseases of inflammation. These are diseases that are very special to modern humans. And so many of these problems can either be ameliorated in some really fantastic cases or at minimum blunted by proper breathing, by adopting proper breathing. I know that sounds impossible. How could diabetes possibly be tied to improper breathing? But it is. How could ADHD and Alzheimer's be tied to improper breathing? It is. And this is what the science is showing us.
And when you say improper breathing, for people that haven't read your book, what does that mean? Like, what is improper breathing?
Improper breathing is breathing either under or over your metabolic needs. It's struggling to breathe. It is snoring at night. It is wheezing when you exercise. So, a bunch of people are probably nodding their heads right now and saying, yeah, I have that. I have that. Because the majority of the population is not breathing properly. And I know that that seems nuts, but all you have to do is look at the data. All you have to do is talk to the experts in the field. And the writing's on the wall when 50% of Americans are snoring and upwards of 20 to 25% are choking on themselves every night and have to use a machine called a CPAP
Mm-hmm.
to blow air into their bodies. Something is wrong with our breathing. And it's been right in front of us for so long, but so many people, including myself, haven't really been paying attention to it.
So a lot of people will say, if they're snoring, it's because there's an obstruction or they can't, like, what is really happening in the body? Because snoring is such a common symptom that as a society, we're just saying that's okay. Like, it's often, and I see this in clinic a lot, so it's biased, but it will be the partner or the wife saying, hey, you're keeping me awake because of your snoring. That motivate, like, suddenly the symptom is a problem. But normally we're just told, people just snore all the time. Like, you go to bed, you sleep, you're sleeping. So does it really matter that you're snoring?
Well, we think it's cute. You can go on YouTube and see babies snoring, and oh, it's my uncle's in the other room. I can't stand it. He's snoring. If you are struggling to breathe, severely struggling to breathe through a third of your life, this is going to have such dramatic downstream effects. And when your health starts suffering, when you're fatigued, when you
Mhm.
start becoming more apt to getting sick, when you start suffering from autoimmune problems, you're like, what's going on? I guess it's just genetic. This is tied to snoring and sleep apnea. I think a lot of people realize how damaging sleep apnea is, but
They
a
do.
lot of people aren't paying attention to snoring. And the science is very clear. If you're struggling to do anything for 8 hours a day, it's going to wear you down. And that's what we're seeing throughout our society. So, snoring is different from sleep apnea. Snoring is when the soft tissues in the back of the mouth make that sort of vibration, that sort of sound when you try to breathe in. Sleep apnea is apnea, means holding your breath. So, that's when you actually stop breathing for seconds at a time and then breathe again. Both of these create a stress response in your body. And when we're sleeping, it is absolutely vital for us to be repairing all the damage done throughout the day. And if we're not repairing that damage, we're going to get sick and it's going to be serious. And again, just look around and you can see the ramifications of this.
And I think, James, what you've just like for people that love numbers and really hammering it home is we sleep, like you say, on average for 7 to 8 hours a night. So if we're doing like there's not if we're eating, and I'm a nutritionist, so I'm all about what's going into your body food wise, but we're not actually eating for 8 hours every single day, like doing the same thing. Like no, most people cannot eat for 8 hours every single day. That's in good health. So, and we think about the food going into our mouths and how much that impacts our health. But like you say, 8 hours of poorly breathing has way more of a cumulative impact. I'm not saying that eating bad doesn't damage your health because we know that, but that aside, this is 8 hours, and like you say, that's what we're doing a third of our lives. Like that is a huge. It's a positive thing in terms of we can change our health for the positive so much when we, and that's why I loved your book, when we understand the power of breath on our health. And it's that real understanding of the positive impact that it can have, but equally the negative impact that it's also having on our health if we're breathing like not properly or incorrectly.
Well, we take 30 pounds of air in and out of our lungs every single day. So, way more than we're eating, way more than we're drinking. And if we're taking that air in improperly, if we're taking it in inadequately, it's going to give us issues. And the science is very clear on this. The same way if we're eating too much or if we're not eating enough. So it's tied into nutrition in so many ways. And a lot of people realize now, yeah, there's junk food and it's bad for my body and it's going to make me sick. And then there's healthy whole foods that are good for my body and they can help cure so many chronic problems. We know that, but nobody's looking at breathing. So you can be the best eater on the planet and you can exercise all the time, but if you're not breathing correctly, if you are constantly struggling to breathe, you're never going to be well, ever, ever. And this is really this missing pillar of health that these researchers and experts have been studying for so long, and a lot of people just really haven't been paying attention to it.
You're 100% not paying attention. And maybe because it almost feels too simple, sometimes we want to overcomplicate health issues. And also, it's very easy to shrug it off and be like, really? And I know in my past, when I was an investment banker, I wouldn't have understood the power of breath until my health collapsed. And I literally had to rebuild my health. And the very first thing that I started with was my breath. And realizing in my case that I was an overbreather. So I was just wasting energy every single, like when you chronically can't get out of bed because you're so tired and so ill, getting back energy from breathing less is a game changer. And it was that simple initially. Like that was one of the building blocks. So that's why I love your work so much, James, because you've quantified everything that anecdotally I experienced. But before we talk about like what is really good breath, a lot of the argument for snoring would be, oh, but I'm breathing through my nose when I snore. Like there is that, we do believe that that's a nose thing that's happening, but is that not happening in our bodies? Are we not, as actually through our mouths, through our throats still?
You're more apt to snore louder more often through your mouth. And this is a nose thing, which does not mean you can't snore through your nose. You can. But what the nose does is it slows down breath and it pressurizes this air and it helps to tone these soft tissues at the back of the mouth. So, also, something else happens when you open your mouth, your tongue naturally rocks back into your throat, makes it harder to breathe. When you close your mouth, that tongue will rock back into the upper palate and help to open your airways. So some people have said that, they've trained themselves to breathe through their nose. They're like, I'm still snoring. So yeah, well that's definitely possible. You're probably snoring less, but the nasal breaths, for I could give you 40 different reasons why nasal breathing is superior than mouth breathing. You're going to be getting more oxygen. You're going to be conditioning that breath. You're going to be filtering it. And again, you can help open your airways by just breathing through your nose. It is not a cure all, but it's a fantastic foundation upon which to breathe um, for throughout the night and throughout the day.
So how do we want to be breathing? So we've talked about that, how we don't want to be breathing. What are we aiming for?
We want to be breathing in line with our metabolic needs. So, if we're exercising, we're breathing at a different rate than when we're sitting
Mhm.
on a couch. But through both of those activities, we should be breathing right in line. And that's a really hard thing to gauge, right? We don't know
Mm.
exactly how much breath we need at each time. But the majority of us, and this was something almost every expert confirmed, breathe too much. So we're over breathing. And if you're over breathing every day of your life, you are unnecessarily overworking your body. Your heart rate's going
Mhm.
to go up. Your blood pressure is likely going to go up. You're going to get anxious. You might get a little spike of adrenaline. Your blood sugar is going to go up. All of these things are associated with the sympathetic nervous system response. And this is the fight or flight response. When we're running from a bear or a robber, and this is great. We want to breathe this way because we're shifting all of this blood flow into skeletal muscles, into our brain, so that we can run really fast or we can fight harder. But we don't want to be doing this throughout the day. It's very damaging to stay in these sympathetic states. And when you're over breathing, you're going to be pushing yourself into that sympathetic state. And this includes while exercising. A lot of people say, well, I have to breathe through my mouth. I have to huff and puff when I'm exercising. You don't. So that need to breathe is not dictated by oxygen levels. This is something almost everyone gets wrong, and I got wrong for decades. It's dictated by rising carbon dioxide levels. So if you exhale and hold your breath, you feel that need to breathe, that's rising CO2. That is not oxygen. Your oxygen is just fine. So
Mhm.
once you start to understand that, you can become aware of it. Once you become aware of it, you can start breathing more closely in line with those metabolic needs.
And do we want to be breathing through our noses? Do we want to be breathing through our mouths predominantly?
Absolutely. So habitual breathing should always be through the nose, in and out through the nose. To be clear, this doesn't mean you have to breathe every single one of those 20,000 breaths a day through your nose. I'm breathing through my mouth a bit. We're talking. You're laughing, you're breathing through my mouth. You're yawning, you're breathing through your mouth. Some pranayama techniques, yoga techniques have you totally
Good.
fine because those are exercises. That's like going to the gym, right? You're not going to stay in the gym 24 hours a day and lifting weights. It's going to destroy you. So think about mouth breathing like that. It's fine to do it on occasion, totally fine, natural. But the majority of your breaths, habitual breathing, should be in and out through the nose.
100% agree with you. And when I was retraining myself, so I had a obstruction in my nose that I was born with, and so I just learned from a baby to breathe through my mouth. And so I've retrained myself. But James, even I, and like when I was working with these breathing experts, they were kind of like, "Oh, you should get to the point where you can talk and breathe through your nose at the same time." And when I'm really diligent about it, I can. But I do know that's my flaw, and I've kind of accepted it. Where I'm like, you know what, 98, like I'm like most of the time I'm really good at breathing through my nose, but I definitely haven't mastered it when I'm taught, especially when I'm really caught up and excited and animated in what I'm saying. That goes straight out the door.
I've tried to do that and I can do it with friends or something, But good luck doing that with interviews, with media interviews, because everyone thinks you're just pausing, so they come in
They
with
do.
questions. So I've
I'm
completely given up. I'm breathing through my mouth so often when I'm talking to these on these interviews. And if I have a day where I've got 8 interviews back to back, I am so exhausted at the end of that day. And I think some of it has to do with taking a breath. Blah, 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 who knows? I wish someone would do a study of that.
Well, but even anecdotally, it's really interesting that you should say that because we think, that it doesn't cause us like a drop in energy until you change your breathing, as I had to just basically for survival of getting my health back. And then when you go back to breathing through your mouth, like I find it energy exhausting. Like I find myself over breathing again. And just draining my energy throughout the day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just in one day. And I was still semi conscious of it. Imagine most of us that are just unconsciously just doing this. So, James,
Yeah.
how? Oh, sorry, you go.
No, it's yeah, it's so simple that few people realize this is real, or that it's so damaging, or it can be so transformative to change your breathing. But look at the science, look at the studies, look at what the experts are saying, look at how the body works. And once you understand that, you realize things do not need to be complicated to work. As Albert Svent Georgi, who won the Nobel Prize in the 30s, said, nature is simple but subtle, and breathing is certainly simple and subtle, but its effects can be absolutely transformative. I've seen this for several years in people whose health has been totally transformed by breathing alone. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying this is a panacea, that this is the only thing you need to do, but it needs to be considered as part of a system of health. And right now, it's not.
And James, you're so right. And I probably, if it hadn't have impacted me when I was working with clients, I wouldn't have considered it as a part of the, like, one of the pillars of really good health. But now it's one of the first questions that I'm asking clients about their health, their family's health. But that's purely because before I had your book and before I had your research, I just experienced that anecdotally and done a lot of research into it. But it's not something that's widespread yet for them because it seems too simple. And how do we make money off that? How do you sell a product when it's literally just teaching somebody how to breathe properly?
Well, you can. I mean, I guess you can if you really, really try. But my father-in-law, I mentioned, is a pulmonologist, and he's a little more crass than I am because he's been in the field for 40 years. He said that's why you're not hearing about this stuff. You can't make money off of it, and if you look at all of the other interventions and medicines, and these are making billions and billions of dollars. And again, I want to be clear. Western medicine is a fantastic thing. I wouldn't be
Oh,
alive today without Western medicine. So this is not an us versus them, and it's not finger pointing. But
not at
if you
all.
look at the way the system is set up, there's no like lack of knowledge about the science of breathing, and there are no side effects to it. And the foundation of science is 70, it's actually longer than that, thousands of years old. But for Western science, it's been proven for decades. So no one's countering that. The problem they have with it is, like, how the hell are we going to distribute this to patients? Because respiratory therapists work one-on-one with individuals. Good luck doing that in the US, where medicine is privatized. It's never going to happen. So I think it's important for people to want to take their health into their own hands a bit more and be proactive about it. And again, just by doing a few simple things can really make a big difference.
And so tell us, what are a couple of simple things? Obviously, when we can read your book and we can understand more, but what is some of the just simple takeaways, like how you change this? Like if you are a mouth breather, as I was, what can you do to change this? How do we suddenly become nose breathers?
The very first thing is awareness, is to become aware of your breathing throughout the day before you go into any practices, techniques, mouth breathing, nasal breathing. And I think once you become aware of your breathing, you start to notice how awful and dysfunctional it is throughout the day. So the real problem with writing a book and spending several years on a book about breathing is I became acutely aware of how terrible I was breathing. And I started wearing some technologies. I was wearing a pulse oximeter and other tech to just get a view into my breathing throughout the day. And right when I would sit down in the morning, open up my computer, 50 emails. Oh my God, I have to get back to all these people. It's urgent. I would start holding my breath for about 30 seconds, 45 seconds at a time, and then breathing way too much because this is a stress response. My body is perceiving this as a danger because we're no longer running away from woolly mammoths or sharks. We view danger as in our immediate circles right now, and we're very sensitized to it. So once you become aware of that, you can take control of it. And again, before doing any techniques, notice when you're holding your breath. Notice when you're breathing too much. Notice when you're working out and your mouth slackens open and you're breathing way too much and your breathing becomes dysfunctional. So that's really the pillar of all this is awareness. Then you can get into more of the granular details of mouth breathing versus nasal breathing, slow breathing, fast breathing, and all of that.
And you've hit such a key point. It's like with anything with our health, it's awareness. Once you've got awareness, that's when we can start to change behavior. That's when we can start. The other thing, though, is, and this is quite a big topic, so I don't mean to dip into it and then dip out of it in terms of time. But what if there's been a lot of trauma in somebody's body? And so for them, just breathing, just the idea of slowing down, because being in the sympathetic state and rather than moving into parasympathetic, if that in itself causes stress, how do you kind of negate or navigate your way through that as just a starting point? Like, I know that's a huge topic, but just as a baby step towards helping your breath, because that will also help the trauma in your body and help reset your whole nervous system. Is there kind of like the little dipping toe into this whole thing for you?
I think that a lot of people want to become the best breathers in the world. Westerners, we want to tackle something and come to it head on. I'm just saying normal breathing can be transformative. Just get yourself up to normal, the way that your body wants to breathe. Then you can become a better breather after that. So if you are chronically stressed, if you have anxiety, if you have panic, if you have asthma, if you have autoimmune problems, I mean, on and on and on, there's a good chance your breathing is very dysfunctional. We know this because of all the studies looking at end tidal carbon dioxide. So without getting into the biochemistry, when you breathe over your metabolic needs, you're going to be off gassing too much CO2, which causes constriction throughout your body. So it's not a coincidence why anxious people constantly have like cold fingers and cold toes, and they're a little dizzy, and they're, oh, I have to sit down. I need to calm down here a moment. So what happens when you breathe too much is you are causing vasoconstriction through these areas in your brain, in your fingertips, throughout the rest of your body. So just by breathing normally, you can feel this shift happen in your, it's like magic, but it's not. It's basic biology. You feel this shift happening inside your body where your fingers and toes start to warm up. You can think more clearly. And this isn't a placebo effect. This is how our bodies operate. And so for those populations, yeah, breathing, there's no side effects to it other than you're going to feel better. So even if this doesn't work for whatever chronic serious situation you have going on, even if it doesn't work immediately, it's going to benefit you and it's going to be part of that foundation to recovery. It has to be. And I'm talking to so many doctors now who are saying exactly they're using it for prehabilitation before surgery and post, rehabilitation after surgery, and have found it makes an enormous effect on your body's ability to heal, because of course it does. But again, this stuff is so simple that few people have really looked at it.
And when you say normal, and I know it's different for everyone and it's really hard to quantify in terms of getting the message out to the masses, I totally get that. What is sort of benchmark average, if you can? Can you quantify that at all, or that's too hard?
You can quantify it with a few measurements. You can look at your blood sats, how much oxygen is in your bloodstream. That's helpful. You can also look at carbon dioxide levels, which is really helpful because most of us, our O2 is just fine unless you have COVID, unless you have emphysema, unless you're at altitude. But for the vast majority of the population, our blood sats are 97, 98. So breathing more, need more breath, isn't going to do anything. So, but the problem happens when you don't have that balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen, then your body needs to compensate and your body will get worn. It can compensate just fine. We're amazing at staying alive. Staying alive is different than staying healthy. So many people get these things confused. It's like, I'm still here. I'm good. It's like, well, you're not because your body is slowly breaking down right now. So I think that those are the things you can look at. O2, CO2, you can look at nitric oxide as well. That's helpful. There's other markers. You can look at CRPs, blood work, but those two, it's amazing what you can do with just oxygen and especially CO2.
And that would be really useful for some people that just truly don't understand, especially in the evenings, where they do believe that they're breathing through, like genuinely do believe that they're breathing through their noses, and are like, and it's sometimes hard to be aware of your own body, where you, and especially when you're asleep at night and you snore, and so you can think that you're breathing through your nose because that's what we've been told. So having measurable, not everyone needs measurable data, I know that, but having something finite where it's like concrete can be useful because it's like actually these markers wouldn't be like this if you really were breathing through your nose. So now we can create the awareness and now we can start working on
Another
it.
wonderful measure is heart rate variability, which shows your nervous system balance. And we had a really fancy machine during the Stanford experiment, and it was absolutely fascinating to see the readout on a computer. And as we're talking, as we're not thinking about our breathing, our waves were all over. It was a complete mess. And then we slow down and just breathe at a rate of about 6 breaths per minute, 5 breaths per minute, if that felt comfortable. And all of the waves, brain waves, blood pressure waves, heart rate, just enter this beautiful pattern, turn into all these waves, because that's your body functioning at peak efficiency, which you want your car functioning at peak efficiency. You want your body functioning at peak efficiency too. So heart rate variability is getting so huge right now because it's an instant way of looking into your stress levels.
100%. And it's such an accurate, it's such a great way. Like I use it often to help clients with behavioral changes because it's one thing for me to sit in my office and tell them, whatever. But when you see it on a piece of paper or you see it on a machine, it's like, okay, I've got to address this. Like I have been ignoring it or I've been kidding myself. And we all tell ourselves stories, myself included. So it's very easy to talk our way out of these situations or, tell ourselves because our bodies are so adaptable. But once you see the evidence, and for some of us it's different, some of us can just feel the evidence, but some of us need to see it in a digital form or on paper. That really does, we've got a choice, and that can really create behavioral changes, especially with our breathing.
I think that's another reason why looking at capnometry and looking at O2 is it's a very useful tool for especially people with panic and anxiety. So they say, I'm out of breath. I'm not getting enough oxygen. If you put a pulse oximeter on her and on one of them, you will see that blood sats aren't moving. They're like, well, why am I getting this feeling? Is because you're not focusing on your breathing. The problem is you have such low CO2. And so to show them how to breathe slowly, even though they've convinced themselves there's no way they're getting enough oxygen this way, to show them on a screen what's happening to their body, I've found is extremely effective with the experts and researchers that I was lucky enough to study with.
100%. And you're right, it's that evidence. Some of us just need evidence to create behavioral shifts
Hmm.
because we've accepted so many norms in society. And so we don't necessarily challenge them. Like it's been a norm to snore. People do it. A lot of people do it. So it's a norm. Why would we challenge it? And like it's just sometimes we need the evidence for some of us, not all of us. James, is there any final, obviously read your book and we've got it here in clinic and download it and stuff, But are there any final parting words that you would like to share with us, or that really, in your not when you were doing your research or writing your book, really you just found like just profound?
I think the main thing is right now, this is an extremely anxious time. It's a very anxious time in the US. We've got an election coming up, and there's a pandemic, and people are stressed out. And really, the quickest way of taking control of some of that stress is by taking control of your breathing. And this is the quickest way to reduce inflammation in your body. A lot of people think, oh, I need to reduce my salt intake. I need to eat certain foods. All of that works, absolutely works. But if you want the quickest fix, you can adjust your breathing to a slow and steady pace. And you can watch what happens to your body after just a couple minutes. And if you see that transformation happening after a couple minutes, what's going to happen after a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months? I think you will be amazed. I've seen this with people, with hundreds of people who, whether even people with scoliosis. I know you're thinking, how is
Yeah.
that possible? How you breathe affects your posture, and your posture affects how you breathe. So this is, I know it sounds like I'm just talking about some new age craziness. There's 500 scientific references on my website. There's pictures, there's x-rays, there's references to the experts working at top institutions working on this stuff. So you can explore that, but don't be dissuaded by how simple this stuff is. I think that's the main thing you can take home. Just because
That's
it's simple doesn't mean it's effective.
And James, that's why I love and I'm so grateful for your work. For like practitioners, you doing the work where you won't necessarily see the flow and impact of how much you doing the research, because it seems so simple. So when I'd say it to clients, it's like, but that's so simple, really? And then I obviously didn't have all the research to back it up. So now when I can be like, just go to James's website, just read it. If you know what I mean? Like, I'm so grateful because such a simple message is so transformational for health. And that's really what all of us in the medical world, or whatever industry we're in, we want that for people. Like, that's why you get into this industry, is because you really want to help and you really want to bring simple, profound things that people can do to change their health and give them tools. You know, like doctors want to give patients tools. They might be different tools depending on whether you're seeing a naturopath or whatever, but that's at the end of the day what it is all about. And so to have this amazing tool that all of us have, like if we're alive, we're all breathing. And so for you to give the evidence, I am so grateful for your research and your hard work and really just digging deeper and getting us that evidence. So thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your time today, because I know how busy you are. And so thank you for that. And thank you for everything that you've done and bringing this book out. A person, you won't see this comment, but James's book, Breath, is also available on Audible, and it's read by you. So there you
It's
go.
read by me. I was supposed to be reading that in a very fancy studio in San Francisco. Pandemic happened, so I read it in my shed in the backyard. So if you hear my dog barking, that's why. Don't tell anyone.
That's even better, James. So there we go. I'm a real book reader, so I like to read physical books, or on my iPad I'll read the books. So I didn't even know you had it on Audible. So thank you, Amelia, for sharing that with us. But that's perfect. So I'm guessing as you talk about it, it's going to bring also more awareness as you're listening to it on the Audible. You can be connecting with your breath and thinking, now I've got James in my ear, really telling me how to breathe.
Exactly. And there in the Audible edition, there are about 12 different breathing methods given by Anders Olsen at the end that you can go and sample, and he leads you through those exercises as well.
Okay, well now maybe I'll have to download the Audible too.
There you go.
I'll get there. So thank you so much, James. We're so grateful for your time today. So thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. Take care.
Thank you, James.